The day my mother tried to move into my beach house, she smiled as if she were giving me the greatest gift of my life. She didn't knock. She didn't call. She didn't even ask. Instead, she stood in my driveway with a moving truck behind her, surrounded by relatives carrying boxes into my home, and proudly said the words that shattered everything I believed about family. "You'll get used to having me here. This house is too big for one person anyway." I wish I could tell you I screamed. I wish I could say I threw everyone out immediately. But I didn't. Because at that exact moment, I noticed someone walking slowly up my driveway. A man in a navy blue suit carrying a worn leather briefcase. He adjusted his glasses, stopped beside my mailbox, and quietly observed everything. No one paid attention to him. Not my mother, not my brother, not my cousins laughing as they carried furniture through my front door. Not even me. At least not yet. Because I had no idea that within the next hour, that quiet man would completely change my family's future. My name is Caroline Brooks. I'm 46 years old. For 24 years, I served as a commander in the United States Navy. People often thank veterans for their service. What they don't always see are the things we quietly leave behind. I missed my little brother's high school graduation because my ship was deployed overseas. I missed Christmas dinners, birthdays, anniversaries. I stood on crowded flight decks while families gathered around warm dinner tables hundreds of miles away. I buried friends who never returned home. I comforted young sailors after storms took everything they had. There were nights when the ocean felt endless, and mornings when I wondered if I'd ever have a place that truly belonged to me. Not a government apartment, not temporary military housing, not another base where I knew I'd be transferred in 2 years. Just home. That dream stayed with me for more than 2 decades. Every promotion, every extra deployment, every dangerous assignment, I accepted them because they brought me one step closer. Not to retirement, to peace. 3 years after my retirement ceremony, I finally found it. A modest white beach house overlooking the Atlantic Ocean. The first time I walked through the front door, sunlight poured through the enormous windows overlooking the water. The hardwood floors creaked gently beneath my feet. The kitchen was simple. The bedrooms were small. The porch needed repairs. Most people would have seen an old house. I saw every tomorrow I'd spent 24 years earning. I bought it 2 weeks later. I named it Sea Glass House. Because every morning, tiny pieces of polished sea glass washed onto the shore behind the property. I collected one every sunrise. It became my ritual. Coffee, ocean breeze, one piece of sea glass. A reminder that even broken things can become beautiful again. The neighborhood welcomed me immediately. Mrs. Evelyn Carter lived across the street. She was 74. A retired school teacher. She baked blueberry muffins every Sunday and somehow knew everyone's business before anyone else. Military? She asked the first day we met. I laughed. Is it that obvious? She pointed toward my posture. You stand like someone who's spent years giving orders. We became friends almost immediately. Sometimes she'd wave from her porch while I watered flowers. Sometimes we'd sit together watching dolphins swim near the shoreline. Life slowed down. For the first time since I was 22, I wasn't rushing toward the next assignment. I could finally breathe. Then there was my family. Or at least, the family I thought I had. My mother, Linda Brooks, lived about 40 minutes away. She called every few days, mostly to ask small questions. Have you eaten? How's the weather? Are you lonely living by yourself? I always answered patiently. After everything military life had taken from both of us, I thought she simply wanted to reconnect. Looking back now, I realized she was gathering information. Learning my routine. Discovering when I traveled. Understanding how often I left the house empty. But at the time, I saw nothing suspicious. About 6 months after moving in, she came to visit. She walked through every room slowly, touching furniture, opening cabinets, looking through the large windows toward the ocean. Finally, she smiled. "You've done well. Thank you." She nodded toward the upstairs hallway. 3 bedrooms? Yes, seems like a lot for one person. I shrugged. I like having guests. She laughed softly. "You rarely have visitors." I smiled. Maybe that'll change. She didn't answer. Instead, she walked onto the porch, looked across the beach, and quietly whispered, "This house should stay in the family." At the time, I thought she meant someday. Many years from now. After I was gone. I smiled. "I hope it does." She squeezed my hand. "So do I." I never imagined we meant 2 completely different things. A month later, she asked for a spare key. "Only for emergencies." "What if you're traveling? What if something happens?" She looked genuinely concerned. I'd never use it unless I absolutely had to. Without hesitation, I handed her one. She's my mother. Why wouldn't I trust her? Trust. It's funny how such a small word can hide such enormous consequences. The next year was peaceful. I volunteered at a local veterans center, started restoring old wooden boats, learned how to paint sunsets, made friends with fishermen who greeted me every morning. Sometimes I'd sit alone on my dock watching pelicans dive into the water. Life finally felt quiet, safe, complete until one Friday afternoon. I was grocery shopping about 30 minutes away when my phone rang. Mrs. Carter, she almost never called. "Caroline?" Her voice sounded unusually tense. "Yes?" "Are you home?" "No. Why?" There was a long silence. Then she quietly asked, "Did you sell your house?" I frowned. "What? There are moving trucks outside." I laughed. "No, there aren't. I'm looking at them right now." Every hair on my arm stood up. "What kind of moving trucks?" "The big ones. Your front door is open. There are people carrying furniture inside." I stopped walking. The shopping cart rolled gently into another display. "What people?" She hesitated, then said the last words I ever expected to hear. "Your mother is directing them." Everything inside me froze. I dropped my shopping bags, ran to my truck, and drove faster than I had since leaving active duty. The entire drive home, one question echoed through my mind. There had to be some explanation, some misunderstanding. Maybe she was storing furniture temporarily. Maybe someone had made a mistake. Maybe, but deep inside, a terrible feeling was growing stronger with every mile. When I finally turned onto Seabreeze Lane, I saw the moving truck. Then another. Cars lined both sides of the street. Relatives stood in my front yard laughing. Children played on my lawn. My front door was wide open, and strangers were carrying boxes into my living room. I slammed on the brakes, stepped out of my truck, and stared at the home I'd spent 24 years earning. It no longer looked like my house. It looked like someone else's celebration. For several long seconds, I couldn't move. I simply stood at the edge of my own driveway, watching complete strangers carry furniture through the front door of the house I had spent 24 years earning. The sound of waves crashing behind the house usually brought me peace. Today, I couldn't even hear them. All I could hear was laughter. My family's laughter. Children ran across my front lawn chasing each other. My cousins stood near the porch drinking lemonade. Someone had even hung balloons on the white fence surrounding my property. It looked less like moving day and more like a housewarming party for someone else's house. I slowly walked toward the porch. Every step felt heavier than the last. As I reached the front steps, my younger cousin Megan smiled brightly. There she is. Several relatives turned toward me. "Oh, Caroline's home. Perfect timing. Come help us." Help them? Help them move into my house? I honestly wondered if I had somehow stepped into someone else's life. Then my mother appeared through the front door. She walked outside carrying my favorite blue coffee mug, the same mug I used every morning while watching the sunrise. She smiled as if nothing was wrong. There you are. She kissed my cheek. I was wondering when you'd get back. I stared at the mug, then at the movers carrying another sofa into my living room. Finally, I looked directly into her eyes. Mom, what is happening? She laughed softly. Oh, don't look so worried. It's just moving day. I blinked. Moving day? She nodded happily. Yes, I'm finally moving in. She said it so casually, as if she'd told me she was staying for the weekend, not permanently taking over my home. I waited for her to smile, to tell me she was joking. She didn't. Instead, she reached into her purse and pulled out a key. My spare key. The one I'd trusted her with over a year earlier. I've already started getting settled. My heart sank. You used my key? Of course. I couldn't leave the mover standing outside. I felt my chest tighten. You never asked. She looked genuinely confused. I didn't think I needed to. Before I could answer, my older brother, Daniel, walked out carrying one of my framed photographs. It was a picture of me standing beside my ship during my final deployment. He frowned. Where do you want this? My mother glanced at it. Oh, she waved her hand dismissively. Put it in one of the upstairs closets. I stared at her. That's staying in the living room. She smiled politely. It doesn't really match my decorating style. My decorating style? This wasn't her house. Every person standing there seemed to have forgotten one very important detail. I owned this home. I stepped onto the porch. Everyone. My voice was calm. I need you to stop moving things. Silence filled the yard. The movers looked toward my mother. Not me. She smiled confidently. Keep going. No one moved. They weren't sure who to listen to. Finally, one of the movers asked, Ma'am, who's the homeowner? My mother answered before I could. We're family. Everything's fine. I took one slow breath. No, it isn't. My Aunt Susan stepped forward. Oh, Caroline, don't make this difficult. I looked at her. Difficult? She nodded. Your mother's getting older. It makes sense. You have all this space. And you're here alone. Several relatives nodded in agreement. One cousin even said, It's the right thing to do. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The discussion wasn't whether my mother had permission. The discussion was whether I had the right to say no. I looked directly at my mother. When exactly were you planning to tell me? She smiled. Today, after everyone finished unloading. I almost laughed. Not because anything was funny, because the situation had become completely unbelievable. You planned all this without asking me? She crossed her arms. I knew you'd overthink it. So, I made the decision. The decision. She actually believed this was her decision to make. Mrs. Carter slowly walked across the street. She stopped beside me. I tried calling as soon as they arrived. Thank you. She looked around the yard. I've never seen anything like this. Neither had I. Just then, one of the movers carried my grandfather's old rocking chair toward the porch. I immediately stepped forward. Stop. He froze. My grandfather had built that chair by hand before I was born. I carefully took it from him. This stays exactly where it is. My mother sighed dramatically. Caroline, that old chair is falling apart. It belonged to Grandpa. So? So? My voice cracked slightly. He taught me how to fish while sitting in that chair. He watched every sunrise from this porch. He gave it to me. My mother shrugged. It's only furniture. No, it wasn't. It was memory. I carried the chair back to its place overlooking the ocean. As I gently set it down, I noticed something strange. The welcome mat had already been replaced. My wind chimes were gone. Flower pots I'd planted months earlier had disappeared. Someone had removed my porch lantern. They hadn't just moved furniture. They'd started erasing me. I walked inside the house. Everything looked different. Family photographs had been removed. My books were stacked in boxes. Kitchen cabinets stood open. My mother's dishes already filled the shelves. Even my bedroom door was open. Inside, strangers were unpacking clothing. I stood frozen. One elderly woman smiled. "Is this your mother's room?" I whispered, "No, it's mine." The woman looked horrified. She slowly placed the blanket back into the box. I'm sorry." She quietly walked away. I turned toward the hallway. "Everyone," my voice echoed through the house. "This move is over." Silence, no one spoke. Finally, my mother slowly entered the living room. "You don't mean that." "I do." She folded her arms. "We've already moved half my things. Then you'll move them back." She smiled confidently. "No." At that exact moment, a calm voice came from behind me. "I believe she just gave you her answer." Every head turned toward the front door. The man in the navy blue suit had finally walked inside. He carried a weathered leather briefcase. His posture was straight. His expression unreadable. My mother frowned. "Excuse me?" He smiled politely. "My name is Jonathan Mercer. I'm an attorney." The room immediately fell silent. My mother looked confused. "Attorney?" He nodded. "Yes, I represent Captain Caroline Brooks." Every relative looked at me. Even I hadn't expected him to arrive so soon. Jonathan calmly placed his briefcase on my dining table, opened it, removed a thick folder, then looked directly at my mother. "Mrs. Brooks, I'd like to ask one simple question." She smiled confidently. "Go ahead. Did Captain Brooks ever give you written permission to move into this property?" She hesitated. "No. Did she give you verbal permission?" "Not exactly." Jonathan nodded. "So, you made the decision yourself." My mother straightened her shoulders. "I'm her mother." He smiled politely. "I understand. But legally, you're also her guest." The room became painfully quiet. Jonathan opened another folder. "I also have certified copies of the property's title, purchase agreement, and ownership records." He slid them across the table. "They all list exactly one owner." He looked at me, then back at my family. Captain Caroline Brooks. No one spoke, not even my brother. Jonathan slowly closed the folder. I should also mention, his voice became noticeably calmer, that before coming here today, I visited the county recorder's office. My stomach tightened. Why had he gone there? Jonathan looked directly at my mother, and what I discovered there, he paused, suggests this situation is far more serious than a family misunderstanding. My mother's smile disappeared. "What are you talking about?" Jonathan reached into his briefcase one final time. He removed a sealed envelope stamped with the county seal, placed it carefully on the table, and quietly said the words that made everyone in the room stop breathing. "Someone has already attempted to file documents involving this property, without Captain Brooks' knowledge." No one said a word. The room that had been filled with laughter only moments earlier suddenly felt suffocating. Every pair of eyes shifted toward the sealed county envelope resting on my dining table. I looked at Jonathan. "What do you mean someone filed documents?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he carefully broke the county seal and removed several certified copies. He spread them across the table one by one. Every page carried official stamps, official signatures, official filing numbers. My mother slowly stepped closer. "What is all this?" Jonathan adjusted his glasses. "About 3 months ago, someone attempted to register a change involving this property." My heart started racing. "A change?" "Yes," he slid the first page toward me. "It wasn't approved, but it was submitted." I stared at the document. Across the top were the words, "Application for property ownership transfer." My hands immediately became cold. "No," I whispered. "I never signed this." Jonathan nodded. "I know." My brother Daniel picked up another page. "What exactly is this supposed to mean?" Jonathan remained calm. "It means someone tried to convince the county that Captain Brooks voluntarily intended to transfer ownership of Seaglass House." My mother laughed nervously. "That's impossible." "I agree." Jonathan answered, "Which is why the county flagged the application." Everyone looked confused. Flagged? Jonathan nodded. The signature didn't match. I looked down again. There it was. My name, written in handwriting that looked almost identical to mine. Almost, if I hadn't signed documents for over 20 years in the military, I might have believed it myself. Mrs. Carter quietly walked inside. She stood near the doorway, listening. Jonathan continued. The county clerk noticed inconsistencies. The application was never approved. But they kept copies. My mother frowned. Why would anyone do something like that? Jonathan slowly looked around the room. That's exactly what we're trying to determine. I picked up another document. My stomach dropped. Attached to the application was a handwritten note. Future owner Linda Brooks. My own mother's name. The room became silent again. I looked at her. She looked at me. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, she shook her head. I've never seen that. You expect me to believe that? I swear. I didn't write it. Jonathan interrupted before the argument could begin. Mrs. Brooks, I'm not accusing anyone. I'm simply presenting facts. He pointed toward the application. This paperwork didn't appear by itself. Someone had prepared it. Someone had signed it. Someone had submitted it. Someone wanted ownership transferred. The only question remaining was who? My younger cousin Megan quietly raised her hand. I remember something. Everyone turned toward her. What? She looked nervous. A few months ago, a man came to Aunt Linda's house. What man? I don't know his name. He carried a black briefcase. They were talking about paperwork. My mother looked confused. What? Megan nodded slowly. I thought he was helping with taxes. Jonathan looked interested. Can you describe him? She thought for a moment. Gray hair. Expensive suit. Maybe 60 years old. Jonathan immediately wrote several notes. I looked at my mother. Who was he? She searched her memory. Then suddenly her face changed. Oh, there was someone. Who? A property consultant. My heartbeat quickened. What was his name? She hesitated. I think Greg. Jonathan immediately looked up. Greg Sullivan? Her eyes widened. Yes, that's him. Jonathan slowly closed his notebook. I was afraid you'd say that. Daniel frowned. Who is Greg Sullivan? Jonathan sighed. A local real estate consultant. He specializes in estate transfers. My mother interrupted. He told me he could help make future inheritance easier. I stared at her. Inheritance? She nodded. He said older parents should organize property before something unexpected happens. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Mom, this isn't your property. I know. I only wanted things to stay simple. Jonathan quietly asked, Did Mr. Sullivan ever visit this house? She nodded. Twice, my heart skipped. What? He said he needed photographs. I felt sick. You brought a stranger into my home? He said it was normal. Suddenly, everything started making sense. The strange questions. The extra interest in my schedule. The requests for spare keys. Even my mother's comments about the house being too big. None of it had been random. Someone had been preparing for this. For months. Maybe longer. Jonathan reached into another folder. I also requested security records from the neighborhood gate. Mrs. Carter looked surprised. They still keep those? They do. He placed several printed photographs on the table. Every picture showed a vehicle entering Seaglass Lane. Different dates. Different times. Then one photograph stopped me cold. A black luxury sedan. Driver. Greg Sullivan. Date. 8 weeks earlier. I looked at my mother. You told me you'd never brought anyone here. She covered her mouth. I forgot. You forgot? I didn't think it mattered. Jonathan quietly corrected her. It matters very much. The room became heavier with every new discovery. My Aunt Susan finally spoke. Linda, why didn't you tell Caroline? My mother looked embarrassed. I thought she'd overreact. I couldn't help laughing. Not because anything was funny. because my own mother believed secretly bringing strangers into my home was less upsetting than asking permission. Just then, the front door opened again. Another man stepped inside, older, neatly dressed, carrying an identification badge. Jonathan smiled. Perfect timing. He walked over, shook the man's hand. Captain Brooks, this is Robert Ellis, senior investigator from the County Property Records Office. My stomach tightened. An investigator? Robert nodded politely. Good afternoon. I apologize for arriving unexpectedly. He opened a slim folder. I'm here because yesterday, Mr. Mercer requested that we reopen a previously suspended file. He looked around the room, and after reviewing everything again this morning, we discovered something new. My heartbeat grew louder. What? Robert removed another document. Unlike the others, this one carried a bright red stamp. Rejected, he laid it carefully on the table. The application wasn't rejected because of the signature. Jonathan looked surprised. It wasn't? Robert shook his head. No, the signature raised questions. But something else stopped the transfer. What? Robert pointed toward the legal description of my property. This land carries a special ownership restriction. Everyone looked confused. What kind of restriction? Robert answered quietly. The previous owner placed a protective covenant on the property. I frowned. What does that mean? It means the house cannot legally change ownership unless specific conditions are met. I blinked. I've never heard of that. You wouldn't. It isn't listed publicly. My mother looked frightened. What conditions? Robert looked directly at me. They only apply to Captain Brooks. The room fell silent. Even Jonathan looked surprised. What exactly are those conditions? Robert slowly closed the folder. I'm afraid that information is sealed. My heart pounded. Sealed? Yes, and only one person has legal authority to explain it. Who? Robert answered without hesitation. The attorney who originally drafted the covenant. Jonathan frowned. I know who that is. I looked at him. You do? He nodded slowly, then smiled in a way I hadn't seen before. He happens to be my former law partner. Every person in the room froze. Jonathan reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, pressed one number, waited. When someone answered, he said only one sentence. It's time. Then he ended the call. I looked at him. Who's coming? Jonathan smiled. The man your family never expected to meet. No one moved. No one even seemed to breathe. My mother looked from Jonathan to the county investigator, her confident smile now completely gone. What do you mean it's time? She asked, her voice noticeably quieter. Jonathan calmly placed his phone back into his pocket. It means the person who created the legal protection on this property is on his way. My brother Daniel frowned. Legal protection? I don't understand. Neither did I. I had lived in Seaglass House for nearly 3 years. I had signed every document during closing. I had read every page my real estate agent handed me. Yet no one had ever mentioned a hidden covenant. I looked toward Robert Ellis. Why wasn't I told? Robert folded his hands. Captain Brooks, you were informed that the property included additional legal protections. I remember that. But I thought it referred to coastal regulations. He nodded. Most buyers assume exactly that. The original owner requested that the complete covenant remain confidential unless someone attempted to challenge lawful ownership. A chill ran down my spine. So, the previous owner expected something like this? Robert didn't answer. Jonathan did. He planned for it. My mother nervously crossed her arms. This is ridiculous. It's just a house. Jonathan looked directly at her. No, it has never been just a house. 20 minutes later, a dark blue sedan slowly pulled into the driveway. Every conversation stopped. An elderly man stepped out. He looked to be in his late 70s. His silver hair was neatly combed. His navy suit fit perfectly despite its age. He carried a worn leather portfolio tucked beneath one arm. There was something calm about him, someone who had spent decades solving problems without raising his voice. Jonathan walked toward him and smiled. "It's good to see you again, Henry." The older man nodded. "You too, Jonathan." Then his eyes settled on me. "You must be Captain Caroline Brooks." "Yes," he extended his hand. "My name is Henry Caldwell. I drafted the covenant protecting this property." Everyone followed us into the living room. Henry placed his portfolio on the dining table, carefully unlocked 2 brass clasps, then removed a thick collection of yellowed legal documents. Some pages looked decades old. Others carried fresh county certification stamps. Henry adjusted his glasses. "I believe everyone deserves to understand why Seaglass House is different." He looked around the room. This story begins almost 30 years ago. The house had originally belonged to a retired naval officer named Admiral Thomas Whitaker. After serving nearly 4 decades, the Admiral purchased the property hoping to spend the rest of his life in peace. Instead, his own family turned against him. According to Henry, several relatives repeatedly pressured the Admiral to place their names on the deed. Some even attempted to convince him he was becoming too old to manage his own affairs. Eventually, someone forged paperwork. They tried to transfer ownership while the Admiral was recovering in a hospital. The fraud was discovered before it became official, but the betrayal nearly destroyed him. Henry paused. He told me something I never forgot. The old attorney smiled sadly. He said, "A stranger can steal your wallet, but only family knows how to steal your peace." The room became painfully quiet. I glanced toward my mother. She couldn't even meet my eyes. Henry continued. "The Admiral asked me to create something that would protect every future owner, not just legally, but morally." Daniel frowned. "What does that even mean?" Henry slowly slid a document across the table. "This covenant states that if ownership is ever challenged through deception, unauthorized occupancy, forged documents, or coercion, the property immediately receives additional legal protection." Robert Ellis nodded. "The county automatically freezes every transfer request. No ownership changes, no occupancy claims, no inheritance adjustments, nothing until the investigation is complete." My Aunt Susan looked shocked. So even if Linda moved in, Robert answered immediately. She would have no legal rights whatsoever. Not after today's events. Henry wasn't finished. "There is one more clause." He opened another document, one that carried Admiral Whitaker's original signature. "The lawful owner has the unrestricted right to permanently revoke access from anyone who enters or attempts to occupy the property without permission." I slowly looked toward my mother. The spare key. Every copy, every future visit, could legally end today. My mother suddenly stood. "This is unbelievable. I'm her mother." Henry smiled kindly. "I don't doubt that, but legally you're also a guest, and guests require permission." Silence, heavy, uncomfortable, permanent. Then Mrs. Carter quietly raised her hand. "I think everyone deserves to see something." She pulled out her phone. I wasn't sure whether to mention this earlier. Jonathan looked interested. "What is it?" "I've had security cameras facing the street for years." She opened an app, pressed play. The video appeared. The date, 6 weeks earlier. Everyone leaned closer. A familiar SUV stopped outside my house. My mother's vehicle. She stepped out, used the spare key, entered my home. No surprise there. But then 5 minutes later, another vehicle arrived. Greg Sullivan's black sedan. The same property consultant. He walked inside carrying a large folder. They remained inside my house for nearly 45 minutes. No one spoke. My heart pounded. I had been volunteering at the Veterans Center that day. They knew I wouldn't be home. Mrs. Carter swiped to another recording. Different week. Different day. Same visitors. This time, Daniel was with them. My brother slowly lowered his head. I stared at him. "You knew?" He didn't answer. You knew all along? His shoulders slumped. I thought Mom had talked to you. You never asked me. I assumed. His voice faded. You assumed it was fine. He nodded silently. I felt something inside me crack. Not anger, not rage, something deeper. Disappointment, the kind that settles into your chest and refuses to leave. Jonathan quietly closed the laptop. I believe the timeline is now clear. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't a spontaneous decision. It was a coordinated plan. No one argued. Because no one could. Then Henry opened one final envelope. This document has remained sealed for 28 years. He handed it to me. It belongs to the current owner. I carefully unfolded the letter. It wasn't legal language. It was handwritten. From Admiral Whitaker. It read, "To whoever someday calls this place home, if you're reading this, someone probably tried to convince you that peace can be taken away. Don't let them. A house isn't protected by walls. It's protected by the courage of the person living inside it. Never surrender your peace simply because the people asking are family." By the time I reached the final sentence, tears blurred the words. I looked out toward the ocean. For the first time that afternoon, I realized I wasn't alone. Someone I had never met had understood exactly what I was living through. Jonathan quietly broke the silence. "Captain Brooks, I believe it's time you decide what happens next." Every face turned toward me. My mother looked terrified. Daniel looked ashamed. The movers stood frozen near the doorway. I slowly folded the letter, placed it back inside its envelope, looked directly at my family, and finally spoke. "You all assumed this house belonged to everyone." I paused. "It doesn't. It belongs to the woman who sacrificed 24 years to earn it." Then I looked at Jonathan. "I think it's time to finish this." For a long moment, no one spoke. The ocean breeze drifted through the open windows, gently moving the white curtains behind me. Usually that sound brought me peace. Today it reminded me exactly what I had almost lost. My home. My sanctuary. The one place I believed no one could take from me. I looked around the living room. Boxes were stacked against the walls. My mother's furniture stood beside mine like two completely different lives trying to occupy the same space. Family photographs lay scattered across the coffee table. For the first time, no one smiled. No one laughed. The celebration was over. Reality had finally arrived. Jonathan carefully closed the leather folder containing all the legal documents. "Captain Brooks," he said calmly, "the decision is entirely yours. You have several options. You may allow your family to remove their belongings peacefully. You may request law enforcement assistance. Or," he paused, "you may begin formal legal proceedings today." Every eye in the room turned toward me. I took a slow breath. 24 years in the Navy had taught me something important. Never make major decisions while emotions are in control. Stay calm. Think clearly. Act with purpose. I wasn't interested in revenge. I wanted accountability. There was a difference. I looked at my mother. "Mom, before I make any decision, I want one honest answer." She slowly nodded. "What made you believe this house belonged to you?" For several seconds, she remained silent. Then she sighed. "I didn't think you needed it." The words landed harder than I expected. "What? You've always been independent. You've always managed on your own. I thought I deserved to enjoy it too." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. So instead of asking, "You decided?" She looked down. "I thought eventually you'd understand." Daniel finally stepped forward. "No." Everyone looked at him. "This isn't the whole truth." My mother immediately turned. "Daniel, don't." But it was too late. He rubbed both hands across his face. There was another reason. I felt my stomach tighten. "What reason?" He looked directly at me. "Mom is drowning in debt." The room became completely silent. Even Jonathan looked surprised. "What debt?" Daniel swallowed. About 3 years ago, she invested most of Dad's retirement savings in a vacation rental business. I frowned. I never heard about that. Because it failed. Completely, she borrowed more money trying to recover. Then borrowed again. My mother quietly closed her eyes. Tears began rolling down her cheeks. I didn't want anyone to know. Jonathan spoke softly. How much? Daniel answered. Almost $600,000. Several relatives gasped. I couldn't process the number. How? Bad investments. Private loans. Credit lines. Everything collapsed. I slowly turned toward my mother. So this wasn't about having somewhere to live. Daniel shook his head. No, it was about this house. What do you mean? He pointed toward the large windows overlooking the ocean. Sea Glass House. It sits on one of the most valuable stretches of coastline in the county. I suddenly understood. They hadn't wanted my home. They wanted what it represented. Its value. Its future. Its equity. Jonathan quietly opened another folder. I suspected something similar. He removed several printed records. My office completed a financial investigation yesterday. He looked toward my mother. Mrs. Brooks, 3 private lenders have already filed collection notices. She lowered her head. I know. And according to these records, one of them suggested moving into this property. My mother's breathing became uneven. They said if I lived here, they would stop calling. I couldn't believe it. She hadn't simply acted selfishly. She had been desperate. But desperation didn't excuse betrayal. I walked toward the window overlooking the ocean. The waves continued rolling toward shore, completely unaware that an entire family was falling apart inside the house. Growing up, my mother worked 2 jobs. She stayed awake helping me with homework. She never missed a school concert. She taught me honesty, responsibility, integrity. Where had that woman gone? Or had I simply never seen this side of her before? Mrs. Carter quietly spoke. Linda, why didn't you ask Caroline for help? My mother wiped away another tear. Because she would have said no. I answered honestly. No, I wouldn't have. She looked at me, confused. If you had come to me, if you had trusted me enough to tell me the truth, I would have helped. Maybe not by giving you my house, but I would have helped. She covered her mouth. More tears followed. I was ashamed. For the first time all afternoon, I saw something different. Not manipulation, not arrogance, just a frightened woman who had made one terrible decision after another until she convinced herself there was no way back. Jonathan broke the silence. Captain Brooks, there is one more matter. He handed me another document. This concerns the duplicated house keys. I looked at it. According to the locksmith's report, my spare key had been copied. Not once, 4 times. I slowly looked around the room. Who has them? No one answered. Jonathan continued. 1 copy belonged to Mrs. Brooks, 1 to Mr. Daniel Brooks, 1 to Greg Sullivan. And he looked toward my cousin Megan. 1 remains unaccounted for. The room erupted with confusion. What? There was another key? Daniel looked horrified. I only had 1. My mother looked equally shocked. I never asked for extra copies. Jonathan nodded. I believe you. Because according to the locksmith, Greg Sullivan personally requested the additional duplicates. A heavy silence settled over everyone. For the first time, the real danger became clear. This had grown far beyond a family disagreement. Someone outside the family had taken advantage of my mother's desperation. Someone had been quietly positioning himself to benefit from my property. Jonathan slowly folded his arms. I don't believe Mr. Sullivan ever intended for Mrs. Brooks to own this house. Everyone stared at him. What? He intended to control it. My heart began racing again. What do you mean? Jonathan placed several business records on the table. Greg Sullivan owns 3 shell companies. Each specializes in distressed property acquisitions. He convinces vulnerable homeowners to sign complicated agreements, then gradually takes control. Mrs. Carter whispered, "Oh my goodness." Jonathan nodded. "I believe your mother wasn't the mastermind. She was the target." Every person in the room looked toward my mother. She appeared completely broken. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I swear, I didn't know." For the first time, I believed her. Just then, Jonathan's phone rang. He answered immediately. His expression changed. He thanked the caller, ended the call, then looked directly at me. "Captain Brooks, the police have located Greg Sullivan." Everyone held their breath. Jonathan continued. "He wasn't trying to leave town. He was already meeting with another family. Another family. Another property. Another victim." Jonathan carefully placed the phone back into his pocket. "He'll be questioned within the hour." I slowly looked around the room. At my brother, my aunts, my cousins, my mother. This story had never been only about a beach house. It was about trust and how easily fear could convince good people to make terrible choices. I took one slow breath, then quietly said, "I'll make my final decision tomorrow morning. I want everyone out of my house before sunset." No one argued. No one protested. They simply began quietly packing the boxes they had spent all afternoon bringing inside. As I watched them leave, I thought the hardest part was finally over. I was wrong. Because early the next morning, someone knocked on my front door. When I opened it, I found a small sealed envelope. No name. No return address. Inside was a handwritten note. Just 7 words. "You still don't know who started this." I barely slept that night. The anonymous note sat on my kitchen table beside my cold cup of coffee. 7 simple words. "You still don't know who started this." I must have read them 100 times. The house was finally quiet again. My family's furniture was gone. The movers had left before sunset. The only sound was the ocean outside my windows. Normally, that sound calmed me. Not this morning. This morning, it felt like the ocean itself was waiting for answers. At exactly 8 o'clock, Jonathan arrived. He found me standing on the porch holding the note. "I assume you received it." I nodded. "You knew?" "I suspected something like this might happen." He looked toward the beach. Greg Sullivan wasn't working alone. I've spent most of the night confirming that. A knot formed in my stomach. "So there really is someone else?" Jonathan gave a slow nod. "Yes, and I think you're about to be even more surprised." 30 minutes later, we arrived at the county investigation office. Detective Laura Bennett was waiting for us. She greeted Jonathan first, then turned toward me. "Captain Brooks, thank you for coming." She slid a thick file across the conference table. "We interviewed Mr. Sullivan late last night." "What did he say?" She sighed. "At first, nothing, but when he realized the evidence against him, he started talking." She opened the file. What he told us completely changed the investigation. Greg Sullivan admitted he had approached my mother nearly 2 years earlier. Not because he wanted to help her. Because he had been studying properties along the coastline. He specialized in identifying elderly homeowners, military retirees, widows, anyone he believed could be emotionally manipulated. He attended community events, charity dinners, veterans fundraisers. He listened. He watched. Then he waited. When he learned about my retirement and later discovered I had purchased Sea Glass House, I became one of his targets. Not because of who I was, because of what I owned. My mother wasn't his first victim. She wasn't even his 5th. Detective Bennett showed us photographs. Families, couples, retirees, people who had unknowingly signed documents they didn't understand. Some lost vacation homes. Others lost farmland. One elderly couple nearly lost everything after trusting Sullivan's estate planning advice. I stared at the photographs. Every face looked familiar. Not because I knew them, because they carried the same expression. Shock, disappointment, betrayal. Detective Bennett continued. Mr. Sullivan admitted something else. He never expected you to fight back. I looked up. What? He believed military families would avoid public legal disputes because of reputation. Jonathan smiled slightly. He underestimated the wrong commander. For the first time in days, I smiled too. Just a little. The investigation moved quickly. Within 48 hours, search warrants were approved. Officers searched Sullivan's office. Inside, they discovered hundreds of confidential client files, fake agreements, unsigned property transfer forms, blank power of attorney documents, even copied house keys, labeled with addresses. Mine was there. Seeing my address written on a small plastic tag sent a chill through me. This had never been random. It had been organized. Calculated, patient. 3 weeks later, the courtroom was filled. Not because of my family, because dozens of other victims had come to testify. Some cried. Others quietly held hands with spouses who had nearly lost everything. I sat beside Jonathan. My mother sat 2 rows behind me. She looked smaller than I had ever seen her. Not physically. Emotionally, the confident woman who had once stood in my driveway directing movers was gone. In her place sat someone carrying the weight of every mistake she'd made. Greg Sullivan entered the courtroom wearing an expensive suit. But this time, no confident smile. No polished speech. No briefcase. Only silence. As the evidence was presented, his entire operation unraveled. Financial records, recorded phone calls, forged paperwork, witness testimony. Everything pointed to the same conclusion. He had built a business around convincing vulnerable families to betray one another. The judge listened carefully, hour after hour. Finally, the verdict came. Greg Sullivan was found responsible for multiple counts of fraud, document forgery, financial deception, and conspiracy related to property schemes. The courtroom remained silent. Justice didn't arrive with cheering. It arrived quietly, the way truth usually does. When the hearing ended, people slowly began leaving. My mother remained seated. She didn't move. I walked toward her. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, she whispered, "I don't expect forgiveness." I looked at the woman who had raised me, the woman who had taught me how to ride a bicycle, how to bake cookies, how to tie my first pair of shoes, and also the woman who had almost destroyed my peace. I've been angry, I admitted. I've been disappointed. I've questioned every memory we've shared. She nodded silently. Tears filled her eyes. I'm sorry. They're only words. I know. I can't undo what I did. No, you can't. She lowered her head. I'll spend the rest of my life wishing I had simply asked. Those words hurt more than anything else she'd said. Because they were true. Everything, every investigation, every lawyer, every courtroom, every broken relationship could have been avoided by one simple question. Caroline, may I move in? Several weeks later, my brother Daniel came to visit. He didn't bring excuses. He didn't ask for favors. He brought paintbrushes. I figured your porch needs repainting. I smiled. It does. For the first time in months, we worked side by side without discussing lawyers, or documents, or betrayal. Sometimes healing begins not with words, but with quiet effort. As for my mother, she moved into a small apartment closer to town. She attended financial counseling, sold what she no longer needed, and slowly rebuilt her life. We spoke occasionally, not every day, not every week, but enough to remind ourselves that forgiveness is a journey, not a destination. Trust, however, takes much longer. Jonathan eventually stood on my porch one final time. He looked across the ocean. You know, Admiral Whitaker would have liked you. I smiled. I wish I could have thanked him. Jonathan reached into his briefcase. There is one last thing. He handed me a small wooden box. Inside was a handwritten note from Admiral Whitaker that had never been opened. It read, "If you're holding this letter, then you protected this home exactly as I hoped someone someday would. Never confuse kindness with surrender, and never believe peace is something you owe to people who refuse to respect it." I closed the box slowly. Those words stayed with me. 1 year later, Sea Glass House looked exactly as it had the day I bought it. White porch, blue shutters, fresh flowers, Grandpa's rocking chair overlooking the ocean. Every morning, I still walked the shoreline collecting one small piece of sea glass. Only now, I understood why I loved those little fragments so much. The ocean never returned broken glass the way it received it. Time, patience, and countless waves transformed sharp edges into something beautiful. People can do the same. Not everyone, but those willing to face the truth. Today, visitors often ask why I never sold the house after everything that happened. I simply smile, because this place isn't valuable for its view, or its location, or its price. It's valuable because it reminds me of one lesson I'll never forget. A house can be built with wood. A family can be connected by blood. But a home is built with respect. And without respect, even family becomes strangers. So if there's one thing I hope you take from my story, it's this. Never let guilt convince you to surrender the life you've worked so hard to build. Kindness is a gift. Trust is earned. And boundaries are not a sign of selfishness. Sometimes they are the strongest act of self-respect you'll ever make. As I watched another sunrise over the Atlantic, holding a tiny piece of sea glass in my hand, I finally realized something. They never tried to take my house. They tried to take my peace. And in the end, they failed.